Ryan Cole put both thumbs on the worn brass latches of the brown leather briefcase. Rain hammered the open trunk lid above him, a steady, cold percussion against the metal. "Wait," Mark Dalton said behind him, his voice low. "Wait a second, Ryan." Renee Whitaker stood a few feet away, soaked through her jacket, her arms crossed against the wind coming off the highway. "That case contains protected government material," she said, evenly, as if she had said it before and knew it wouldn't matter. "Do not open it without a supervisor and legal authority present." Ryan didn't look up. To him, the warning sounded like confirmation. The latches popped. He tilted his flashlight down into the case, and the beam caught black stenciled letters across a manila folder. "Confidential. Federal Public Corruption Investigation." Beneath it, surveillance photographs, financial charts, a stapled document with a name typed in bold at the top, Captain Grant Hollis. Ryan felt something electric move through his chest. The particular thrill of a young officer who believes he has just found the case that will define his career. What he had actually found was an investigation into his own command staff and a container built specifically to record who touched it. 25 minutes earlier, none of this existed. There was only a wet Illinois highway, headlights smeared across the windshield, and a woman driving home alone in the rain. The heater in Renee's old sedan hummed low, fighting a losing battle against the cold seeping through the door seals. Windshield wipers beat a slow rhythm against the glass. In the back seat sat 2 suitcases, and resting against them, a briefcase gone soft and dark at the corners from 20 years of use. Renee had just left a room with no windows, 3 federal agents, 2 state investigators, and an assistant U.S. attorney named Dana Wells. The meeting had lasted 4 hours. It concerned an operation that had, until tonight, existed mostly on paper and in careful whispers. Operation Brown Line. Renee didn't think about the name. She thought about the drive, and the rain, and the ache behind her eyes from too many hours under fluorescent light. She didn't see the patrol car until its light bar ignited behind her, red and blue smearing across her rearview mirror. She checked her speed, checked her lane. Then she remembered the rear license plate light had been flickering for 2 weeks, a small maintenance item she kept meaning to fix and never did. She signaled, eased across the shoulder, and stopped cleanly on the gravel apron beside the road. Officer Ryan Cole approached from the driver's side, flashlight sweeping the interior before it reached her face. He was 30 years old, 3 years on the job, the kind of officer who studied interdiction training videos on his own time, and believed, with total sincerity, that he had an instinct for spotting what other officers missed. "Evening, ma'am. Reason I stopped you is your rear plate light's out, and I saw you drift toward the center line back there by the construction zone. I appreciate you telling me," Renee said. "License and registration are in my wallet, in my jacket pocket. I'll reach for it slowly. Go ahead." She handed the documents through the window without hurry, without irritation, the practiced calm of someone who had done this 1,000 times from the other side of the glass. Ryan carried them back to his cruiser. Officer Mark Dalton, 47, arrived as backup a minute later and parked his unit at an angle behind Ryan's, headlights cutting through the rain toward the sedan's rear window. Mark had worked patrol for 2 decades. He had learned, slowly and sometimes painfully, that most nights ended better when you didn't go looking for something that wasn't there. Ryan ran the plate and the license. No warrants, no stolen vehicle report, no criminal history of any relevance. A clean record, a valid registration, a woman with a steady voice and a working set of directional signals. This should have been the end of it. A warning about the plate light, maybe a written citation, 30 seconds of paperwork, and a wave goodbye. Instead, Ryan lingered at her window. "So where are you coming from tonight?" "A meeting downstate." "And where you headed?" "Home. Little late for a meeting to run this long." "It ran long," Renee said. "That happens sometimes. I noticed you've got some luggage back there. Suitcases and what looks like an old briefcase. That's a lot to be carrying for one meeting." "It is what it is." Ryan studied her face for a moment, the flashlight beam drifting from her eyes down to her hands, resting still on the wheel. Her calm unsettled him in a way he couldn't name yet. He would later describe it, in his report, as unusual composure. What he was actually seeing was a woman who had given testimony in federal courtrooms, who had sat across from men far more threatening than a nervous patrol officer, and who understood that panic gave power to people who didn't deserve it. "You mind if I take a look inside the vehicle?" Ryan asked. "Just to clear things up." "I do mind," Renee said without heat. "I do not consent to a search." The words eyes landed flat and clear, no hesitation in them. Ryan's jaw tightened slightly. "I'm going to need you to step out of the car." "Are you ordering me to step out?" "Yes." "Then I'll comply," Renee said, opening her door into the rain. "I'm complying with your order. I want to be clear that I am not consenting to any search of this vehicle or its contents." She stood on the gravel, water already soaking through her shoulders, and looked directly at the small camera clipped to Ryan's chest. "For your body camera," she said, "state your probable cause." Ryan hesitated. "You're traveling out of your home county at night. You've got luggage consistent with transport, and there's an odor coming from the vehicle." He looked toward Mark. "You smell that?" "Kind of like an air freshener, masking something." Mark shook his head slowly. "I don't smell anything, Ryan." Nobody said anything for a moment. Just rain, and the idling engines, and the low static hiss of a radio somewhere in one of the cruisers. "I'm complying," Renee repeated. "I'm not consenting." Ryan opened the trunk. He lifted the first suitcase onto the wet gravel and unzipped it. Folded shirts, a pair of shoes, a toiletry bag. He lifted each item and set it down onto the wet ground, checking pockets, running his fingers along the seams of the lining. Nothing. He zipped it shut, not bothering to refold anything, and reached for the second suitcase. Same process, same result. Nothing illegal, nothing unusual. Just the ordinary contents of an ordinary overnight bag, now scattered and damp on the roadside. Mark watched Ryan's expression change with each empty search, the frustration building instead of easing. "Ryan?" Mark said quietly, stepping closer. "Records are clean, bags are clean. I think we're done here. Write the equipment warning and let's clear the scene." "There's still the trunk floor," Ryan said, "and the spare tire well." He pulled up the trunk liner, checked beneath the spare, ran his hand along the side panels. Nothing. Every negative result should have told him something. Instead, in his mind, it only meant the evidence was somewhere he hadn't looked yet. That was when he saw the briefcase. Worn brown leather. Brass latches gone dull with age. Heavier than it looked when he lifted it out. "This yours?" he asked. "It is," Renee said. Her voice, for the first time, carried an edge beneath the calm. "That case contains protected government material. It should not be opened without a supervisor present and appropriate legal authority." "That's a pretty specific thing to say about a briefcase, ma'am. It's a pretty specific case." Mark stepped closer, uneasy now, in a way he hadn't been with the suitcases. "Ryan, let's slow down. If she's telling us there's something official in there, maybe we call this in before we go further." "If it's official, she can explain that after I look," Ryan said, already working the latches. Renee didn't move. She didn't raise her voice, and she didn't reach for the case. She simply watched, her jaw set, the muscles along her arms tight beneath her soaked jacket. The latches gave way. Inside, sealed against the weather in a slim waterproof lining, was a small transmitter built into the seam of the case. It had one purpose. If the case was opened outside a specific authorized location, it sent a signal, not an alarm, not a siren. Just a quiet data packet, carrying a timestamp, a location, and a container identification number, out to 3 phones at once. One belonged to Dana Wells. One belonged to Samuel Price, the department's internal affairs director. One belonged to Deputy Chief Lena Brooks. None of them knew yet what had triggered it. They only knew that something had. Ryan lifted the folder inside and angled his flashlight down. Confidential. Federal Public Corruption Investigation. Surveillance photographs of men getting in and out of cars in a parking lot. A stack of financial charts with names redacted in some places and circled in others. Serialized envelopes, each stamped with a tracking number. and beneath all of it, a draft warrant. A name typed at the top in bold, Captain Grant Hollis. Ryan flipped through the pages, and for several long seconds he simply stood there in the rain, reading, not thinking about the scene around him, not thinking about the wet suitcases on the ground, or the woman standing silently a few feet away. Mark's voice cut through it. "Ryan, close it. Close the case and get on the radio." Ryan finally looked up. "This is federal corruption material. This could be huge." "It could be a lot of things," Mark said. "None of them are yours to be handling on the side of a highway." Ryan keyed his radio anyway, reading the name off the license he still had in his jacket pocket. "Dispatch, I need a deeper check on a Renee Whitaker, driver's license number." He read the number. There was a pause on the other end, a longer pause than usual. "Copy," the dispatcher said, her voice suddenly careful. "Unit, hold your position. Do not touch any additional materials in that vehicle. Do not close any containers. Preserve the scene as it is. Command is being notified. Dispatch, what's going on? Just hold, unit. Command is en route." Ryan looked down at the folder still open in his hands, then at Mark, whose face had gone pale in the glow of the headlights. "Who is she?" Ryan asked. Nobody answered, because at that moment a black SUV pulled onto the shoulder ahead of them, and Deputy Chief Lena Brooks stepped out into the rain. Lena's eyes moved fast across the scene. The open suitcases. Clothes scattered on wet gravel. The briefcase open on the trunk lid, its protected contents exposed to the weather and to 2 patrol officers who had no clearance to see any of it. And Renee, standing in the downpour, soaked to the skin, saying nothing. "Chief," Lena said. The word landed on Ryan like a physical blow. He looked at Renee again, really looked, the calm eyes, the steady voice. The woman he had spent the last 20 minutes treating like a suspected courier. She was the highest-ranking officer in the department. Renee didn't acknowledge the reveal beyond a small nod toward Lena. She had already turned her attention to the open case, running through its contents with the focus of someone counting cash at the end of a long shift. "2 envelopes are missing," she said. Lena stepped beside her, lowering her voice. "Which ones?" "The financial identifiers and the decoy account file." Renee's eyes moved along the trunk, the ground, the gravel. "They were here when I left the meeting. Dana confirmed the full manifest before I got on the road." "Who's been near this vehicle since the trunk opened?" "Officer Cole, Officer Dalton. Nobody else until you." Renee looked up at the empty stretch of highway behind them, rain sheeting through the headlights. "Unless someone got here before you did." A second set of headlights appeared, faster than the others, cutting hard onto the shoulder and stopping at an angle that suggested urgency rather than caution. Captain Grant Hollis stepped out, buttoning his coat against the wind, his expression already arranged into something calm and reassuring. "Renee, I heard the call come through. Are you all right?" "I'm fine, Grant." He looked over the scene, the open luggage, the exposed documents, and shook his head with practiced concern. "This looks like a misunderstanding that got out of hand. Let's get everything gathered up. Get it back to headquarters where it belongs, and I'll personally look into how this happened. No need to loop Federal in on a roadside mix-up." "2 envelopes are missing from the case," Renee said. Something flickered behind Grant's eyes, there and gone in under a second. "The financial identifiers and the account file, you mean?" Renee went still. She hadn't told him which envelopes. "I'm not sure I mentioned specifics," she said carefully. Grant's smile didn't move, but his eyes did, just slightly, calculating. Lena must have said it on the radio. Lena hadn't said it on the radio. Renee knew that, because Lena hadn't known it herself until 30 seconds ago. "How did you get here so fast, Grant?" Renee asked. "I was 15 minutes from headquarters when I called this in. You beat Lena, and her office is closer than yours." "I was already out. Heard the traffic on the scanner." It was a reasonable answer. It was also, Renee suspected, untrue, and she filed that thought away instead of speaking it aloud. She turned to Lena. "I need to step back from evidence control. I'm the driver. I'm the subject of the search. I'm a witness now, not a custodian. You have command of this scene." Lena nodded once, already reaching for her radio. "Copy that, Chief." She turned to the officers on scene. "I want every body camera locked and uploaded before end of shift. No exceptions. Dashcam footage from both units preserved and pulled tonight. Dispatch audio archived. Vehicle GPS on every unit that responded, frozen and logged. Officers Cole and Dalton, you'll be separated, and each write an independent report before you go home. Every document on that ground gets photographed exactly where it lies before anyone touches it again." Grant's hand had drifted toward the open trunk while Lena spoke, close to where one of the missing envelopes should have been. "I can help gather these up," he offered. "Nobody touches anything else," Lena said. "Including you, Captain." Samuel Price arrived within the hour, his gray sedan pulling in behind the growing cluster of vehicles. Rain still falling steadily under the emergency lights. Samuel had built a career on believing evidence over instinct, timelines over reputations. He requested the dashcam footage from both patrol units before he said more than a few words to anyone at the scene. What the footage showed, once pieced together over the following days, told a story more precise than anyone's memory could offer. It showed Ryan's search extending well past the point where any objective evidence supported it. It showed Renee's clear refusal, twice stated, unmistakable on audio. It showed Mark's warning before the briefcase opened, and his failure to physically stop what came next. It showed the case opening, the documents exposed, and roughly 90 seconds of confusion, during which Ryan stood reading instead of securing the scene. And in the corner of one frame, barely visible through the rain-streaked lens, it showed a shape moving near the rear of the vehicle, a person Samuel would later confirm, through GPS records pulled from Grant's assigned SUV. Had arrived at that exact stretch of highway nearly 4 minutes before Grant ever radioed in his location. Grant's vehicle GPS placed him moving toward the scene before Ryan had even announced what he'd found over dispatch. Grant had known where Renee's route would take her that night. He had no legitimate reason to. One missing envelope was found the next morning, half buried in wet gravel, 30 feet from where the sedan had been parked, its serialized tracking number matching the manifest Dana Wells had recorded before Renee ever left the meeting. The second envelope surfaced 4 days later, during a lawfully warranted search of Grant's personal vehicle tucked beneath the driver's seat. Renee explained the larger picture to Lena and Samuel over coffee that had long since gone cold, in a conference room with the blinds drawn. For nearly a year, federal and internal investigators had been tracing a pattern across the department. Seized cash that never made it to the property room, manipulated towing contracts routed through a private company with inflated invoices, false asset forfeiture paperwork, and citizen complaints that vanished before reaching a supervisor's desk. All roads eventually pointed toward Grant. The briefcase carried marked duplicates, not the original case file, decoy schedules, serialized copies designed so that anyone improperly accessing them could be identified later by which specific documents moved and where. The real evidence sat elsewhere, secured, untouched by anything that happened on that highway. The roadside exposure had damaged the operation's timing, but it hadn't destroyed it. Dana Wells argued for patience rather than immediate arrests. "If we move on Grant tonight, we get Grant," she said. "If we wait and watch, the marked material tells us who else he calls." It wasn't a comfortable decision. It also wasn't reckless. Grant's financial accounts were already under quiet federal monitoring, and his travel documents could be restricted, without alerting him that the walls had begun closing in. Over the following days, the network began to fracture on its own. An evidence room supervisor accessed transfer logs he had no current reason to open. A finance employee flagged for review suddenly filed for early retirement. A private towing executive began quietly moving funds between accounts late at night. Several officers, none of them central to the conspiracy, but all of them compromised by small favors and larger silences, began contacting Grant through phones that weren't registered in their names. The circle stayed small, focused. Exactly the size the evidence supported, no larger, no smaller. 9 days after the traffic stop, Grant arranged a meeting at a closed impound facility on the edge of the county, a place he had once controlled the access logs for himself. He arrived carrying a duffel bag with cash, a folder of account credentials, and travel documents that had no business belonging to a captain of police. He also carried, tucked in an inner pocket, the second marked envelope, the one recovered days later from beneath his car seat, which meant on this night it was still in his possession, still evidence, still moving toward a buyer who never arrived. Federal agents had wired the facility 2 days earlier. Renee was present, but not alone, standing back with a full tactical team positioned in the dark beyond the loading dock lights. When the exchange was confirmed on recording, she stepped into view. Grant froze at the sight of her, rain long since stopped, the warehouse lights casting long shadows across the concrete. "This started because a kid opened the wrong briefcase," he said, something bitter creeping into his voice. "The briefcase didn't start your choices," Renee said. "It gave them a timestamp." He was arrested without incident, the duffel bag and its contents logged into evidence by agents who had been building this case for nearly a year. In the weeks that followed, Grant faced charges of conspiracy, bribery, theft of seized property, evidence tampering, and obstruction. The towing executive and 2 department employees faced their own charges, proportionate to what the evidence actually showed each of them had done. Independent reviewers reopened dozens of old asset forfeiture cases and towing disputes that had quietly disappeared under Grant's influence over the years. Where the evidence supported it, seized property and money were returned to people who had given up hope of ever seeing them again. Ryan Cole's case went before a disciplinary board 3 weeks after the arrest. The board reviewed the equipment violation that started the stop, which they found lawful. They reviewed the clean records check. They reviewed Renee's clearly recorded refusal of consent, twice stated on body camera audio. They reviewed Mark's failure to confirm the alleged odor. They reviewed 2 empty suitcases and an unsupported search of the trunk that followed them. They reviewed the moment the briefcase was opened, despite a direct warning. Their finding was precise. The stop began within lawful bounds. Everything after the records check came back clean had exceeded them. Ryan received a suspension without pay, loss of his solo patrol status pending retraining, mandatory instruction on search and seizure law, bias awareness training, and a period of field supervision under a formal performance plan. His written report, when it came in, was honest almost to a fault, detailing his own reasoning and its failures without much attempt to soften it. The board noted the honesty. It didn't erase the misconduct, and nobody pretended it did. Mark Dalton faced his own review. A duty to intervene finding that carried its own discipline and retraining requirement. He couldn't excuse his way out of it by pointing out that he'd only been backup that night, that the search hadn't been his to run. He had recognized the moment things went wrong, and recognizing it wasn't the same as stopping it. His supplemental statement, filed a week after the incident, was thorough and unflinching, and it became part of the record used to build the department's new training materials. Renee met with Ryan once the disciplinary process was already underway, in a small office with the door closed and no cameras running. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't mention the suitcases scattered on the wet ground, or the briefcase, or how it had felt to stand in the rain, while a stranger decided her calm was evidence of guilt. "Your first red on that plate light in the lane movement," she said. "That was a legitimate reason to stop me. Nobody's disputing that." Ryan nodded, saying nothing. Everything after that needed new facts to justify it. Clean records, clean bags. An odor your partner wouldn't confirm. Every piece of evidence you gathered that night should have made you less certain, not more. Instead, you filled the gap with suspicion instead of proof. "I judged you off the car," Ryan said quietly. "Off the luggage, off wanting to be the guy who found something." "I know," Renee said. "The next driver you stop won't be a police chief. There'll just be somebody with an old car and a bag in the trunk. That's who's going to tell you whether any of this actually changed something in you." The department's new policies took effect within 2 months. Consent to search a vehicle, now had to be verbally confirmed on recording, with an explicit statement read aloud by the requesting officer and a clear response captured from the driver. Training now drew a hard line between compliance with an order and consent to a search, a distinction officers were tested on before they were certified to work patrol alone. Extended luggage searches required supervisor notification when no immediate danger existed. Officers had to document each specific fact, supporting probable cause, not general categories. Negative search results now had to factor explicitly into any decision to continue a detention. Protected government material triggered a stop and secure protocol, requiring the scene be locked down and command notified immediately, before any further contents were reviewed by an officer without clearance. Duty to intervene requirements were strengthened and clearly defined, no longer left to individual judgment about how forcefully a warning needed to be delivered. Asset forfeiture records went under external review. Towing contracts were open to independent oversight. Command-level vehicle GPS and building access logs were preserved automatically going forward, no longer subject to informal explanation after the fact. A corruption reporting channel was established outside the normal chain of command, answerable to Samuel Price's office, and, beyond that, to an independent board with no operational ties to the department. Renee made one more change, quieter than the rest, that applied only to herself. She stopped carrying operations alone, dual custody for sensitive material, backup routes, external tracking on anything moving between secure locations, shared authority, distributed deliberately so that no single chief, captain, or investigator could ever again control an entire operation's physical evidence by themselves. It was, she told Lena, the most obvious lesson of the whole ordeal, and the one she was most embarrassed to have needed, taught to her at 44 years old with over 2 decades on the job. Several months later, on a clear evening with no rain at all, Ryan Cole pulled over an older sedan for a burned-out brake light on the same stretch of highway. The driver, a man in his 60s, had a suitcase in the back seat and a battered tool case riding beside it. Ryan explained the reason for the stop. He ran the license and registration. The record came back clean. He looked at the tool case for a moment, an old habit rising and then settling back down. Nothing in front of him gave him a reason to go further, so he didn't. He issued a warning, handed back the documents, and told the man to get the light fixed when he had a chance. The driver pulled away, taillights fading into the dark. Ryan stood on the shoulder a moment longer than he needed to, watching the empty highway. Somewhere behind him, later that same week, Renee Whitaker drove the same road again, windows down, the brown briefcase resting on the back seat exactly where it had always ridden. The case was empty now. The department was still rebuilding, one policy and one hard conversation at a time. And so, in his own smaller way, was Ryan. Renee didn't think about any of that as she drove. She thought about the stretch of open road ahead of her, dry for once, and how far a city could travel in the space between one mistake and the choice to actually learn from it.